8-year-old Amara Okafor stood frozen in terror as 7 black mambas, the world's deadliest snakes, slowly emerged from the abandoned termite mound she had accidentally disturbed while playing in the South African bushveld. Her grandfather's warnings echoed in her mind. Never move when you see mamba, never run, never breathe loud, pray to God and stay still like stone. The largest snake, nearly 12 feet long and thick as a man's arm, raised its head 6 feet into the air, its mouth opening to reveal the black interior that gave these serpents their name. One bite contained enough venom to kill 20 adult humans in minutes. Amara had nowhere to run. The nest blocked her path back to the village, and thick thornbush surrounded her on 3 sides. "Please, God," she whispered in Zulu, her voice barely audible. "Send the angels grandfather told me about." That's when she heard it, the distant rumble that started like thunder and grew into a roar that shook the African earth. 1,200 motorcycles from the Thunder Road MC, the largest biker rally in South Africa's history, were converging on the small village of Mthanzini for their annual charity ride when they heard the emergency radio call, "Child trapped by deadly snakes. All available units respond." What happened next would become legend across 2 continents and prove that angels sometimes wear leather and ride steel horses. Would you like to join us for this incredible journey? Subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss what happens next. The Thunder Road Motorcycle Club had been riding across the KwaZulu-Natal province for 3 days, their annual charity convoy growing larger at each stop as local clubs joined the massive procession heading toward Mthanzini village. What had started as 200 riders from Cape Town had swelled to over 1,200 motorcycles from across South Africa, representing clubs that normally never rode together. Former enemies united by the Brotherhood of the Road and their shared commitment to helping communities in need. Colonel Marcus Steele van der Merwe, the 60-year-old former South African Defence Force commander who led Thunder Road MC, guided his custom Harley-Davidson down the dusty road that led to their final destination. The powerful machine beneath him had been his companion for over 15 years. Since his retirement from military service that had included tours in the border war, peacekeeping missions across Africa, and counter-terrorism operations that remained classified. Behind him stretched the largest motorcycle procession in South African history, a river of chrome and leather that extended for over 5 kilometers through the rolling hills of Zululand. The sight was spectacular and intimidating, riders from every background imaginable, united by their love of motorcycles and their commitment to using their brotherhood for positive community impact. The convoy included former soldiers like Marcus, retired police officers, doctors, teachers, construction workers, business executives, and unemployed veterans struggling to find purpose after military service. Their motorcycles ranged from vintage Harley-Davidsons to modern sport bikes, from custom choppers to practical touring machines. But what they all shared was the understanding that their annual charity ride was about more than just motorcycles. It was about proving that bikers could be a force for good in communities that often viewed them with suspicion. "Control, this is Steele," Marcus spoke into his helmet radio, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military command experience. "We're 20 clicks out from Mthanzini village. ETA 15 minutes for lead elements. Weather is clear, road conditions are good, convoy is maintaining formation." The voice that crackled back through his earpiece was urgent, panicked, completely unlike the calm professionalism of the police dispatcher who had been coordinating their arrival. "Steele, this is Mthanzini Police Station. Constable Dlamini speaking. We have an emergency situation developing. 8-year-old girl trapped by black mamba nest. Our snake handlers are an hour away minimum. We need any assistance you can provide immediately." Marcus felt his blood run cold as the implications hit him. Black mambas were Africa's most feared predators, lightning fast, extremely aggressive, and carrying venom so toxic that even the best medical treatment often failed. A child trapped by multiple Mambas had virtually no chance of survival without immediate intervention. All units, this is Steel," Marcus announced to the 1,200 riders behind him, his voice cutting through their individual conversations and music with the sharp edge of command authority. "Emergency situation ahead. Child in imminent danger from deadly snakes. We are now a rescue operation. Form up for tactical approach. This is not a drill." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 1,200 motorcycles began organizing themselves with military precision that would have impressed any professional army, club rivalries, and territorial disputes forgotten in the face of a child's peril. Former soldiers automatically moved to leadership positions, medical personnel identified themselves through radio channels, and the entire convoy transformed from a charity ride into a rescue armada within minutes. Dr. Sarah Mudlalos, a 45-year-old trauma surgeon riding with the Durban Devils MC, accelerated her BMW adventure bike to join the lead formation. Her bright yellow medical panniers marked her as one of 3 doctors in the convoy, and her experience treating snakebite victims at Durban's urban hospitals had given her unique expertise in dealing with venomous reptile emergencies. "Steel, this is Doc Mudlalos," she radioed. "I've got full trauma kit, surgical supplies, and type 1 polyvalent anti-venom for African elapids. What's our tactical situation? How many snakes are we dealing with?" "Unknown at this time, Doc," Marcus replied, his mind already shifting into the tactical planning mode that had served him well during 30 years of military service. "We're flying blind until we reach the scene. All I know is that a child is trapped and professional snake handlers are too far away." Behind them, the word spread through the massive convoy like wildfire carried by desert wind. A little girl was trapped by black mambas, Africa's most deadly serpents, and 1,200 bikers were about to become her only hope for survival. The emotional impact was immediate and profound. Many of these riders were fathers and grandfathers themselves, and the thought of a child facing such terror alone motivated them in ways that no military order could have achieved. Sergeant Joshua Rhino Mathembu, a former Special Forces operator riding with the Johannesburg Iron Eagles, moved up through the convoy to join the tactical leadership discussion. His massive Kawasaki Ninja, an unusual choice for a man of his size and background, was capable of speeds that made it ideal for reconnaissance missions. During his military service, he had earned his nickname by charging through enemy positions with the same unstoppable determination that characterized the animals of the African bush. "Steel, this is Rhino," he radioed as he pulled alongside Marcus's Harley. "Black mambas don't typically hunt in groups. If there's multiple snakes in one location, we're looking at a nesting site or a territorial concentration around a food source." The implications were terrifying. Black mamba nesting sites were defended with extreme aggression that surpassed even their normal hunting behavior, and any perceived threat would trigger coordinated attacks from multiple serpents moving at speeds up to 20 kilometers per hour. A child trapped in such a location was facing not just one deadly predator, but an entire family of the world's most venomous snakes operating with unified purpose. Captain David Hawk Pretorius, a former military pilot whose tactical air support experience had taught him to think in 3 dimensions about complex operations, accelerated his vintage Triumph to join the leadership formation. His call sign came from his ability to see tactical situations from above, to understand terrain and movement patterns in ways that ground-bound soldiers often missed. "What's our approach strategy?" Hawk asked, his voice carrying the analytical precision that had made him invaluable during military operations. 1,200 motorcycles create an overwhelming presence, but they also create enormous noise and vibration. Exactly the kind of disturbance that would agitate already defensive serpents. Marcus considered their options as the convoy thundered toward Mthunzini, dust clouds marking their passage across the African landscape like the war parties of ancient times. The tactical challenges were unlike anything he had faced in 30 years of military service. Human enemies could be negotiated with, intimidated or outmaneuvered using psychology and superior firepower. But venomous serpents operated on pure predatory instinct, and they would interpret any aggressive action as a threat requiring immediate lethal response. "We stop the main convoy at safe distance and approach with minimal numbers," Marcus decided, his command voice carrying to the other tactical leaders through their radio network. "Small team for initial assessment, medical team on standby. Full convoy provides backup and psychological support through presence without proximity." The village of Mthunzini appeared ahead through the afternoon heat shimmer, a collection of traditional round houses with thatched roofs intermixed with modern buildings, nestled among acacia trees and thornbush that had provided shelter for rural communities for countless generations. But instead of the usual bustling activity of a rural community, children playing, women working in gardens, men gathered under trees for discussion, an eerie quiet had settled over the entire area. Even the dogs had stopped barking, and the birds had fallen silent. Police Constable Peter Dlamini met the lead motorcycles at the village entrance, his face grim with tension and exhaustion. He was a young man, probably in his mid-20s, and this was clearly the most serious emergency he had ever faced in his career. His uniform was soaked with sweat, despite the moderate temperature, and his hands shook slightly as he pointed toward the crisis location. "The child is trapped 200 meters that way," he said in accented English, pointing toward a cluster of trees beyond the village perimeter. "Her grandfather sent her to collect medicinal bark from the fever trees, and she accidentally disturbed what we think is a mamba nesting site. 7 snakes, maybe more. We can see them clearly from here with binoculars. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" Marcus dismounted his Harley and pulled out his military-grade field glasses, studying the terrain ahead with the analytical eye that had kept him alive through decades of dangerous operations. The landscape was typical South African bushveld, open grassland dotted with termite mounds and scattered acacia trees, perfect habitat for black mambas who preferred elevated positions for hunting and territory surveillance. Through the binoculars, Amara was clearly visible in the distance, a tiny figure standing motionless beside what appeared to be a large termite mound. Even from 200 meters away, her terror was evident in every line of her small body. She stood like a statue, not daring to move even the smallest muscle, understanding instinctively that any motion could trigger an attack that would kill her within minutes. "Jesus Christ Almighty," whispered Captain Pretorius, looking through his own binoculars at the scene. "How long has she been standing there like that?" 47 minutes and counting," Constable Dlamini replied, consulting his notebook with the precision of someone who understood that every detail might be crucial. Her grandfather noticed she was missing and organized a search party. When they found her, she was already surrounded. She hasn't moved since then. Smart girl. She knows that movement triggers attacks. Dr. Midlalose studied the scene through her medical training lens, assessing not just the immediate snake threat, but the physiological challenge facing an 8-year-old child. 47 minutes of absolute motionlessness under extreme stress, she murmured. She's probably going into shock. Her blood sugar is dropping, her muscles are cramping, and her psychological state is deteriorating rapidly. Through the binoculars, Marcus could see the snakes clearly now. 7 black mambas, ranging from 8 to 12 feet in length, had emerged from the termite mound and were maintaining defensive positions around Amara like a living barrier of death. The largest snake, clearly the dominant territorial male, was in an elevated threat posture with its head raised 6 feet off the ground, ready to strike with lightning speed at any movement or perceived aggression. The tactical situation was unlike anything the Thunder Road leadership had ever encountered. During their various military and law enforcement careers, they had dealt with human enemies who could be negotiated with, intimidated, or outmaneuvered through superior tactics and firepower. But Black Mambas operated on pure predatory instinct, millions of years in development, and they viewed any movement or vibration as a potential threat requiring immediate elimination. "What about the professional snake handlers?" Marcus asked Constable Delamini. "What's their ETA?" "Still 30 minutes minimum," the policeman replied, checking his radio for updates. "And honestly, sir, they're not sure they can handle 7 mambas simultaneously. Most snake removal operations involve single animals in controlled environments. This situation is unprecedented." Marcus felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome burden. 30 minutes was far too long for Amara to maintain her perfect stillness. Eventually, exhaustion or panic would cause her to move, and any movement would trigger coordinated attacks from multiple serpents, carrying enough venom to kill dozens of adult humans. "We don't wait," Marcus decided, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions under impossible pressure. "That little girl has been standing perfectly still for almost 50 minutes. She's probably in shock, her blood sugar is crashing, and she won't be able to maintain that position much longer." He turned to address the growing group of Thunder Road leaders who had dismounted for the tactical discussion. Word of the crisis had spread through the convoy, and experienced riders with military, medical, and emergency response backgrounds had moved forward to offer their expertise. "Brothers and sisters," Marcus announced, using the formal address that signaled the seriousness of what he was about to propose, "I need volunteers for the most dangerous mission any of us has ever attempted. We're going to surround those snakes and that little girl with a wall of motorcycles and human courage. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments." The response was immediate and unanimous. Every rider who could hear his voice stepped forward without hesitation, ready to risk their lives for a child they had never met. The sight was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Dozens of tough, weathered bikers, many of them grandfathers themselves, volunteering to face deadly serpents to protect one small girl. "No," Marcus said firmly, his command voice cutting through their enthusiasm. "This requires precision, not numbers. Too many people will create chaos and increase the danger to everyone, especially Amara. I need exactly 12 riders, former military, law enforcement, emergency responders, people who can function under extreme stress without making mistakes that could cost lives." The selection process was swift and based on qualifications that could be verified through military records and professional licenses. Dr. Sarah Mudlalos stepped forward first, her trauma surgery experience and snakebite treatment expertise making her indispensable for the medical aspects of the rescue. Trauma surgeon, former military field medic, 15 years experience treating venomous snake bites in emergency room settings, she announced, presenting her credentials with military precision. Sergeant Joshua Mathembu joined her immediately. Special forces, counter-terrorism, expert marksman, wilderness survival training including dangerous wildlife encounters, he stated, his massive presence somehow reassuring despite the circumstances. Captain David Pretorius nodded his acceptance of the mission. Military pilot, tactical air support coordinator, precision operations specialist, emergency extraction expertise. One by one, 9 more volunteers presented their qualifications for what everyone understood was essentially a suicide mission. Former paratroopers who had jumped into hostile territory, police tactical unit veterans who had faced armed criminals in close-quarter battles, emergency medical technicians who had worked disaster scenes, and wildlife specialists who understood African predator behavior. The final team of 12 represented decades of training and experience in life-or-death situations, but none of them had ever faced anything quite like this. Tank Williams, a former explosives expert whose road name came from his ability to demolish any obstacle, would handle equipment and logistics. Snake Morrison, ironically nicknamed for his ability to move silently through enemy territory, would coordinate stealth approach tactics. Doc Peters, a retired military physician, would provide backup medical support. Blade Johnson, a former knife-fighting instructor, understood close-quarter combat against dangerous opponents. Phoenix Martinez, a helicopter rescue specialist, knew emergency extraction procedures. Diesel Thompson, a former marine demolitions expert, could improvise solutions under pressure. Hammer Anderson, a former military police officer, understood crowd control and perimeter security. Wolf Davis, a former sniper, could provide precision observation and threat assessment. Eagle Rodriguez, a former Air Force survival instructor, understood animal psychology and predator behavior. Meanwhile, the remaining 1,188 motorcycles formed a massive perimeter around the village, their riders understanding that their role was to provide backup, crowd control, and psychological support for the rescue team. The sound of their engines created a low rumble that seemed to make the very earth vibrate, a mechanical thunderstorm that could be heard for miles across the African bushveld. "All right, brothers," Marcus addressed his 12-person rescue team with the gravity of a military commander briefing soldiers before a dangerous mission. "Here's our situation. One 8-year-old girl surrounded by 7 black mambas in defensive territorial behavior. Professional snake handlers are 30 minutes away, too long for the child to maintain her current position." He pulled out a detailed map of the area, spreading it on the hood of Constable Dlamini's police vehicle. "Our approach will be in 3 phases. Phase 1, tactical approach on foot, pushing motorcycles manually to minimize noise and vibration. Phase 2, establish protective perimeter around both child and serpents. Phase 3, extraction of child while maintaining standoff distance from aggressive wildlife." Dr. Mudlalos raised her hand with a crucial question. "What about anti-venom? Even if we succeed in extracting the child without anyone being bitten, black mamba venom acts within 15 to 20 minutes. We need immediate medical countermeasures available. You carry the anti-venom, maintain position closest to the action, and be prepared to administer treatment immediately if anyone gets bitten," Marcus replied. "We hope and pray we don't need it, but we prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario." Sergeant Mathembu studied the terrain through binoculars, his special forces training automatically analyzing fields of fire, escape routes, and tactical disadvantages. The ground is open grassland with scattered trees, good visibility but no cover if things go sideways. Wind is calm, which means our scent won't carry to agitate the snakes further. Sun angle is favorable for our approach. Captain Pretorius added his own tactical assessment. 12 motorcycles moving in formation will create significant visual impact. We'll look like a large, coordinated threat to territorial animals. That could work in our favor if we appear too dangerous to challenge. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The approach phase required nerves of steel and coordination that would have challenged professional military units. 12 motorcycles were slowly pushed across 200 meters of open grassland toward a deadly nest of Africa's most dangerous snakes, each step calculated to minimize noise, vibration, and perceived threat to animals that could kill a human being in minutes. The team moved in tactical formation that Marcus had learned during counterinsurgency operations, a diamond pattern that provided mutual support and multiple angles of observation while presenting a unified front to potential threats. Each rider carried emergency medical supplies, communication equipment, and the knowledge that one mistake could result in multiple fatalities within minutes. As they drew closer to Amara's position, the details of her situation became horrifyingly clear through their binoculars. The 8-year-old girl stood like a living statue beside the termite mound, her small body rigid with terror and absolute concentration. Tears had carved tracks through the dust on her face, but she hadn't moved a single muscle in nearly an hour. Her lips moved occasionally in what appeared to be silent prayer, the only sign that she was still conscious and fighting panic. The 7 black mambas were clearly agitated by the approaching humans, but confused by the lack of aggressive movement. The largest snake, probably the territorial dominant male, maintained its elevated threat posture, with its head raised 6 feet off the ground, swaying slightly as it tracked the approaching motorcycles. Its mouth was partially open, revealing the black interior that gave these serpents their terrifying name, and its tongue flicked constantly as it tested the air for chemical signals, indicating the intentions of these strange intruders. The other 6 snakes moved restlessly around the termite mound in patterns that wildlife experts would recognize as defensive territorial behavior. They were protecting their nesting site from perceived threats, operating on millions of years of evolutionary programming that made them among Africa's most successful predators. Amara, Marcus called out softly in Zulu as they reached their predetermined position, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the terrified child without creating noise levels that might trigger aggressive responses from the serpents. "My name is Marcus. We're here to help you. You're doing perfectly. Just keep being brave and standing still exactly like your grandfather taught you." The little girl's eyes moved toward his voice, the first voluntary movement she had made in nearly an hour, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she looked directly at the 12 leather-clad bikers who had appeared like a vision from another world. "Are you the angels?" she whispered in Zulu, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the slight breeze rustling through the acacia trees. "Grandfather said angels would come if I prayed hard enough." Marcus felt his heart break at the faith and desperation in her voice, at the absolute trust of a child who had been taught that prayer could summon divine intervention in moments of ultimate crisis. "We're here to protect you, little one," he replied in careful Zulu, drawing on language skills he had learned during his military service in rural areas. "Just like angels. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments." The 12 rescue motorcycles formed a perfect circle around Amara and the mamba nest, with each rider positioned exactly 20 meters from the child, close enough to provide immediate assistance, but far enough away to avoid triggering aggressive responses from serpents that were already highly agitated by the unprecedented situation. The formation created a protective barrier that served multiple tactical purposes. It provided visual intimidation to the snakes through the presence of large, coordinated threats. It offered multiple angles of approach for emergency medical intervention, and it created psychological reassurance for Amara, who could see that she was no longer alone against the deadly predators. The largest mamba, clearly the alpha male of the group, began moving toward the nearest motorcycle with the fluid, terrifying grace that had made these serpents Africa's ultimate predators for millions of years. Its head remained elevated in strike position as it approached Sergeant Mathembu's position, its 12-foot length moving across the ground with hypnotic smoothness that belied the explosive speed it could achieve when attacking. "Contact," Mathembu reported quietly into his radio, his special forces training keeping his voice calm, despite facing a creature that could kill him faster than he could blink. "Alpha male approaching my position. 12 feet long, fully elevated threat posture, definitely preparing to assess whether I represent a challenge to territorial integrity." Marcus studied the snake's movement pattern through his binoculars, drawing on both his military experience and his knowledge of African wildlife gained through years of living on the continent. The mamba was exhibiting classic territorial assessment behavior, approaching potential threats to determine their intentions without committing to full aggressive action unless absolutely necessary. "Nobody moves a muscle," Marcus ordered through the radio network. "Let it investigate us." Mambas are curious and intelligent, but not randomly aggressive unless they feel cornered or threatened. If we don't challenge its territorial authority, it may decide we're not worth the energy expenditure of a full attack. The tension was unbearable as the massive serpent approached within striking distance of Sergeant Mathembu, who remained motionless beside his motorcycle with the absolute stillness that had kept him alive during Special Forces operations in hostile territory. The mamba paused 3 feet from his position, its tongue flicking rapidly as it tested the air for chemical signals that would indicate whether this large, strange creature represented food, threat, or neutral presence. For 30 seconds, that felt like 30 hours, predator and protector stared at each other across an evolutionary divide spanning millions of years. The snake's black eyes showed no emotion, no fear, no aggression, only the cold calculation of a perfectly evolved killing machine determining whether lethal action was necessary. Then, incredibly, miraculously, the snake began to withdraw. The lack of aggressive posturing from the humans had confused its threat assessment protocols, and it retreated toward the termite mound to rejoin the other mambas in defensive positions around their nesting site. "Phase 1 complete," Marcus announced quietly, relief evident in his voice despite his military training. "We've established a defensive perimeter without triggering aggressive response from the primary threat. Now comes the hard part, extracting the child." Dr. Mundlalos moved to the position closest to Amara, her medical training and smaller physical size making her the logical choice for direct contact with the terrified child. She carried a complete trauma kit including antivenom, cardiac medications, and surgical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death if anyone was bitten during the extraction. "Amara, sweetie, my name is Dr. Sarah," she called out softly in English, then repeated the message in Zulu. "I'm going to come to you very slowly and carefully. When I reach you, I'm going to pick you up and carry you to safety. But I need you to stay exactly as still as you are now until I tell you it's safe to move." "Will the snakes bite me?" Amara whispered, her voice carrying the absolute terror of a child who understood exactly how close she was to death. "Not if you stay very still and let me do all the moving," Dr. Mundlalos assured her with the confidence that came from 15 years of emergency medicine experience. "Your grandfather taught you exactly the right thing to do. You've been perfect, and now we're going to get you out of here." The extraction phase required precision that bordered on the supernatural, a level of coordination and nerve control that tested every aspect of the rescue team's military and emergency response training. Dr. Sarah Mundlalos moved across the 20 meters separating her from Amara, with movements so calculated and deliberate that each step seemed choreographed, every shift in weight planned to minimize the ground vibration that might trigger aggressive responses from 7 highly agitated black mambas. The medical doctor's approach was a masterclass in tactical movement under extreme pressure. Her 15 years of trauma surgery had taught her to function under stress, but her military field medic training from years ago provided the movement discipline that kept her alive as she crossed ground where the slightest misstep could result in multiple snake strikes, carrying enough venom to kill 20 adult humans. Behind the rescue circle, the sound of 1,188 motorcycle engines created a wall of mechanical thunder that seemed to confuse the Mamba's ability to localize specific threats. The massive convoy had become an unintentional psychological weapon, overwhelming the serpent's sensory systems with too much auditory stimulation to process effectively. The constant rumble created a sonic backdrop that masked the subtle sounds of Dr. Mundlalos's careful approach. 10 meters, she reported through her throat microphone, her voice steady despite the fact that she was now within striking range of the closest mamba. "Primary alpha male is tracking my movement but maintaining defensive rather than offensive posture. Secondary males are showing increased agitation but no immediate aggressive indicators." Marcus watched through binoculars as Dr. Mundlalos continued her approach, every nerve in his body screaming warnings about the danger she was walking into. The tactical situation was unlike anything in his 30 years of military experience. Too many variables, too many ways for the mission to fail catastrophically. Too much depending on the behavioral patterns of predators that operated on instincts older than human civilization. 5 meters, Dr. Mudlalos reported, her voice still calm, but carrying the slight tension that came from being close enough to see the individual scales on the nearest snake's skin. Alpha male has lowered his head slightly, possibly indicating reduced threat assessment. I'm proceeding to final approach. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see sweat streaming down Dr. Mudlalos's face, despite the moderate temperature, her body responding to stress levels that would have incapacitated most people. But her hands remained steady, her movements controlled, her medical training and military background combining to keep her functional under pressure that would have broken civilian rescuers. "Contact! I'm with Amara," Dr. Mudlalos announced as she reached the terrified child, her voice carrying relief and determination in equal measure. The moment when Dr. Mudlalos gently placed her hands on Amara's shoulders was witnessed by 1,200 bikers, who had been holding their breath for what felt like hours. The little girl's body was trembling with exhaustion and fear, her muscles cramped from maintaining perfect stillness for over an hour, her face streaked with tears that she hadn't dared to wipe away. "You did so well, sweetie," Dr. Mudlalos whispered in Zulu as she carefully lifted Amara into her arms. "Your grandfather would be so proud of how brave you've been. Now, I'm going to carry you away from here, and you can finally rest." Amara collapsed against the doctor's chest like a broken doll, her strength finally giving out after the longest hour of her young life. Her small arms wrapped around Dr. Mudlalos's neck with desperate gratitude, and she began crying with the relief of a child who had faced death alone and lived to be comforted by adult protection. "Package secured, Doctor," Mudlalos announced through her radio, using military terminology that somehow made the moment feel more manageable. "Beginning withdrawal. Child is exhausted but conscious, no visible injuries, responsive to verbal commands. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The retreat was even more dangerous than the approach had been. Dr. Mudlalos now carried a 40-pound child while moving across terrain where the slightest misstep could trigger attacks from 7 highly venomous serpents that were becoming increasingly agitated by the unprecedented situation. The other 11 rescue team members maintained their protective positions, creating a human shield between the doctor and the Mambas, their presence serving as both physical barrier and psychological deterrent. Amara, overwhelmed by relief and the after-effects of extreme stress, had begun crying loudly, the first real noise she had made in over an hour. The sudden sound had an immediate and terrifying effect on the black mambas, who interpreted the crying as the distress call of prey animals, triggering predatory responses that had been held in check during the period of absolute silence. "Multiple contacts incoming," Sergeant Mathembu called out urgently as 3 of the largest Mambas began moving rapidly toward Dr. Mudlalos's position, 3 snakes advancing on extraction route, alpha male and 2 secondary males moving to intercept at high speed. The tactical situation deteriorated with the speed of a military ambush. The Mambas, confused and agitated by over an hour of tense standoff, suddenly saw movement and heard sounds that triggered millions of years of predatory evolution. They began moving with the terrifying speed that made them Africa's most feared serpents, up to 20 kilometers per hour across open ground, fast enough to run down most prey animals, and certainly fast enough to catch a doctor carrying a child. Marcus made a split-second decision that probably saved both lives and demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that had kept his soldiers alive through decades of dangerous operations. "All units, start engines now. Maximum noise, maximum intimidation, override their sensory systems." 12 motorcycles roared to life simultaneously, creating a deafening cacophony that completely overwhelmed the Mamba's ability to process auditory information. The mechanical thunder was unlike anything the snakes had ever encountered. Too loud, too sudden, too alien to their natural environment to be processed through normal predatory responses. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The three advancing Mambas stopped their approach as if they had hit an invisible wall, their heads turning in confusion as they tried to locate the source of the overwhelming noise. The sound was coming from all directions simultaneously, making it impossible for them to identify specific threats or develop appropriate responses. Dr. Mindlelos used the distraction to complete her withdrawal, carrying Amara to safety behind the protective barrier of motorcycles and medical equipment. The moment she crossed the perimeter that the rescue team had established, 1,188 engines erupted in celebration, creating a victory roar that could be heard for miles across the African bushveld and probably confused wildlife populations throughout the region. "Medical assessment!" Dr. Mindlelos called out as she began examining Amara for any signs of snake bites, shock-related injuries, or other medical issues that might require immediate treatment. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with thousands of emergency situations, checking pulse points, examining skin for puncture wounds, assessing neurological responses. No visible snake bites, no puncture wounds, no signs of envenomation, she reported to the gathered rescue team. Pulses elevated but stable, indicating stress response rather than medical emergency. Patient is dehydrated and exhausted but otherwise unharmed. Recommended treatment is immediate fluid replacement, rest, and psychological support. Marcus approached the little girl who had just survived one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters imaginable, his weathered face showing the relief and admiration that every member of the rescue team was feeling. This 8-year-old child had demonstrated courage and discipline that would have impressed professional soldiers, maintaining perfect stillness under circumstances that would have broken many adults. "Amara," he said gently in Zulu, kneeling down to her eye level beside Dr. Mindlelos, "you were the bravest person I've ever seen in 30 years of dealing with dangerous situations. You did exactly what your grandfather taught you, and it saved your life." Amara looked up at the massive, leather-clad biker with eyes that seemed much older than her 8 years, eyes that had seen death up close and survived through a combination of training, courage, and divine intervention. "Are you really angels?" she asked, her voice still weak from exhaustion, but carrying a wisdom that surprised everyone who heard it. "We're just people who ride motorcycles and try to help when we can," Marcus replied, with the humility that characterized genuine heroes. "But we came when you prayed for help, so maybe that makes us angels of a sort." Constable Dlamini arrived at that moment with Amara's grandfather, an elderly Zulu man, whose weathered face showed the worry lines of someone who had spent the past hour believing he might lose his granddaughter to the most terrifying death imaginable. Mandla Okafor was 78 years old, a respected traditional healer whose knowledge of medicinal plants had sent Amara on the mission that nearly cost her life. "My child," the old man whispered in Zulu as he took Amara from Dr. Mindlelos's arms, his voice breaking with relief and gratitude. "I thought the ancestors had called you home." He turned to face Marcus and the 12 rescue team members, his eyes bright with tears and respect. "You saved my granddaughter's life," he said in careful English. "In my culture, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for protecting that person's spirit for all time. You are now family." The profound impact of those words was not lost on any of the Thunder Road members. In their various military and civilian careers, they had received medals, commendations, and official recognition for their service. But being adopted into a Zulu family by a traditional elder represented something deeper and more meaningful than any government award. Dr. Mindlelos, who had just risked her life to save Amara, was deeply moved by the grandfather's words. "Sir, we were honored to help. Your granddaughter showed incredible courage. She's a remarkable child. She is blessed," Mandler agreed, studying the faces of the 12 people who had risked their lives for his family. And you are the answer to her prayers. The ancestors sent you to protect her. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The celebration that erupted in Mithunzini village that evening was unlike anything the community had ever experienced. 1,200 motorcycles had descended on their small rural settlement, not as invaders or troublemakers, but as protectors who had risked everything to save one little girl from certain death. The local community, which had initially been frightened by the massive biker convoy, embraced their unexpected heroes with traditional Zulu hospitality that transformed the rescue into a cultural celebration. Fires were lit throughout the village as families prepared traditional food to feed the overwhelming number of guests. Women who had never seen motorcycles before found themselves cooking for leather-clad bikers who helped with food preparation and shared stories about their own families. Children who had initially hidden from the intimidating strangers discovered that many of the bikers were grandfathers themselves, carrying pictures of their own grandchildren and small gifts that they shared freely. The local community, led by traditional leaders and village elders, organized a celebration that honored both Amara's survival and the courage of the people who had saved her. Traditional drums were brought out, and Zulu praise songs were adapted to tell the story of the 1,200 angels who had answered a little girl's prayer. Marcus found himself sitting beside Mandla Okafor around one of the cooking fires, sharing a traditional meal while Amara slept peacefully in her grandfather's lap, finally able to rest after her ordeal. The contrast between the elderly Zulu healer and the leather-clad biker would have seemed impossible just hours earlier, but their shared concern for Amara's welfare had created an instant bond that transcended cultural differences. In our tradition, Mandler explained to Marcus in his careful English, when someone saves a child's life, they become part of that child's spiritual family, not just for today, but for always. You and your brothers have responsibilities now. Marcus nodded respectfully, understanding that he was being offered something precious and permanent. Sir, what kind of responsibilities? You must watch over Amara as she grows. You must make sure she receives education that will help her help others. You must teach her about the wider world while we teach her about our traditions. Mandler's eyes sparkled with the wisdom of age and experience. And most important, you must show her that there are people in the world who will risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Dr. Mundlalos, who had been listening to the conversation while monitoring Amara's condition, added her own perspective. Sir, we would be honored to be part of Amara's extended family, but you should know that we live all over South Africa. How can we maintain the kind of relationship you're describing? Mandler smiled with the patient understanding of someone who had lived through decades of social change and technological advancement. The Thunder Road family comes to our area every year for your charity ride. Amara can come to visit you in the cities when she is older, and there are telephones and computers that connect people across great distances. The practical arrangements for maintaining a relationship between a traditional Zulu family and a motorcycle club spread across South Africa would normally seem impossible. But the emotional bond created by shared danger and mutual respect had already begun solving logistical problems that would have defeated purely administrative approaches. Captain Pretorius, who had been coordinating with local authorities, approached their group with news about the aftermath of the rescue. The snake handlers finally arrived and removed all 7 Mambas from the nesting site. They confirmed that we were dealing with a breeding population, the most dangerous possible scenario. Those snakes would have attacked anything that moved within 50 meters of their nest. Sergeant Mathembu added his own professional assessment. The wildlife officials said that black mamba nests are normally defended by 2 or 3 adults maximum. 7 adult mambas in defensive formation around a single nest is unprecedented in South African wildlife management records. Marcus studied Amara's sleeping face in the firelight. marveling at the courage and discipline the little girl had shown under circumstances that would have broken many adults. She survived something that shouldn't have been survivable. Maybe her grandfather is right about divine intervention. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a news crew from Durban who had driven 3 hours to cover the story of the massive motorcycle rescue operation. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Zulu, approached their group with the enthusiasm of someone who recognized an extraordinary story. "Excuse me," she said politely, "I'm Sarah Zulu from East Coast Radio. We've heard that 1,200 motorcyclists rescued a child from deadly snakes. Could we interview some of the people involved?" Marcus looked to Mandla Okafor for guidance, understanding that this was the grandfather's decision to make. Traditional communities often had complex relationships with media attention, and he didn't want to create problems for Amara's family. "You may tell the story," Mandla decided after a moment of consideration. "People should know that angels come in many forms and that prayers are answered in unexpected ways." The interview that followed would be broadcast throughout South Africa and eventually picked up by international news networks. Marcus's calm, humble description of the rescue operation, combined with Dr. Midlalose's medical expertise and Mandla's spiritual perspective, created a story that resonated far beyond the motorcycle community. "What made you decide to risk your lives for a child you'd never met?" Sarah Zulu asked. Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. "When you hear that a child is in danger, you don't stop to think about risks or calculate odds. You respond because that's what decent people do. Our military training gave us the skills to coordinate a rescue operation, but any parent would have tried to help." Dr. Midlalose added her own perspective. "The medical aspects of the rescue were challenging, but the emotional impact was simple. A little girl needed help, and we were in a position to provide it. Everything else, the danger, the complexity, the coordination, was just details to be managed. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments." 6 months after the Mamba rescue, the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club had discovered that saving a life created responsibilities and rewards that extended far beyond the immediate emergency. 8-year-old Amara Okafor had become their unofficial mascot and spiritual center, while her grandfather, traditional healer Mandla Okafor, had become their cultural advisor and bridge to understanding African traditional wisdom. The relationship between the motorcycle club and the Zulu family had developed in ways that surprised everyone involved. Modern technology allowed regular communication between Amara's rural village and the urban areas where most Thunder Road members lived, creating a network of support and affection that transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. Dr. Sarah Midlalose had taken primary responsibility for Amara's medical care and educational development, driving the 3 hours from Durban to Mthunzini once a month to provide health checkups and tutoring in English and mathematics. The trauma surgeon who had risked her life to save Amara had discovered that her greatest reward was watching the little girl's confidence and knowledge grow with each visit. "She's extraordinary," Dr. Midlalose reported during one of Thunder Road's monthly meetings. "Her traditional education from her grandfather is incredibly comprehensive. Medicinal plants, weather patterns, animal behavior, cultural history. But she's also brilliant at mathematics and languages. With proper educational opportunities, she could become anything she wants to be." Marcus nodded with the pride of someone who had become an honorary grandfather to an exceptional child. "What kind of educational opportunities?" "Her grandfather wants her to learn about the modern world, but he also wants her to maintain her connection to traditional culture. There are programs that specialize in exactly that balance," Dr. Midlalose explained. "Schools that combine traditional African knowledge with modern academic subjects. But they're expensive, and most are in urban areas far from her family." The discussion that followed would lead to the establishment of the Thunder Road Education Foundation, a scholarship program specifically designed to help rural African children receive educational opportunities while maintaining their cultural connections. Amara would be the first beneficiary, but the program would eventually support hundreds of children throughout southern Africa. Captain Pretorius, who had been researching educational options with his usual military precision, presented the group with a comprehensive analysis of possibilities. There's a school in Pietermaritzburg that specializes in bilingual education, English and Zulu. They have boarding facilities for rural students, but they also have programs that allow children to spend significant time with their families during school breaks. Sergeant Mathembu, who understood the cultural implications better than most of the group, raised important questions about the psychological impact of such arrangements. Removing a child from her cultural environment can be traumatic, even when it's for educational advancement. We need to make sure we're helping Amara, not harming her. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mandla Okafor, during one of their regular phone conversations, proposed an arrangement that demonstrated the wisdom that had made him a respected traditional healer. Amara should spend the school year learning modern subjects in the city, he suggested, but every school holiday she comes home to learn traditional knowledge from me and her grandmother. This way, she becomes a bridge between two worlds, instead of losing connection to either one. The arrangement required complex logistics and significant financial commitment from the Thunder Road MC, but it represented exactly the kind of long-term thinking that had made their organization successful in other community service projects. They weren't just rescuing one child from one emergency, they were investing in that child's entire future. Dr. Mindlelos volunteered to serve as Amara's urban guardian, providing housing and support during school terms. Her apartment in Durban was transformed to accommodate a young girl who would be navigating between traditional rural life and modern urban education. She'll have her own room, access to computers and internet, tutoring support when needed, Dr. Mindlelos explained, but most importantly, she'll have someone who understands both her background and her potential. The first year of Amara's advanced education exceeded everyone's expectations. The 9-year-old girl, who had survived a black mamba encounter through courage and traditional training, proved to be exceptionally gifted academically. Her teachers reported that she absorbed new information with remarkable speed while maintaining the wisdom and maturity that came from her traditional upbringing. "She's teaching us as much as we're teaching her," reported Mrs. Elizabeth Mbeki, Amara's primary teacher at the Pietermaritzburg school. "Her knowledge of medicinal plants has helped our science classes understand traditional African chemistry. Her understanding of weather patterns from traditional observation methods has enhanced our meteorology studies." Marcus felt enormous pride when he received Amara's first report card, showing excellent grades in all subjects and special recognition for her leadership abilities among younger students. The little girl who had once stood frozen before deadly serpents was now helping other children overcome their own fears and challenges. "She's becoming exactly what her grandfather predicted," Marcus reflected during one of their monthly meetings. "A bridge between worlds, someone who can help traditional communities benefit from modern knowledge while preserving cultural wisdom." The annual Thunder Road Rally had evolved into something much larger than a motorcycle gathering. The Mthunzini Miracle Rally now attracted riders from across Africa and beyond, all coming to celebrate the story of courage, brotherhood, and cultural cooperation that had begun with one little girl's prayer for divine intervention. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? This year's rally was particularly special because it marked the 2nd anniversary of Amara's rescue and the official launch of the Thunder Road Wildlife Emergency Response Program. The South African government had recognized the motorcycle club's successful handling of the Mamba crisis and authorized them to serve as rapid response coordinators for wildlife emergencies throughout KwaZulu-Natal province. Over 3,000 motorcycles had gathered in Mthunzini for the celebration, making it the largest biker rally in African history. But the event had transcended its motorcycle origins to become a multicultural festival that celebrated community service, traditional wisdom, and international cooperation. 2 years ago, a little girl stood frozen in front of deadly snakes and whispered a prayer. Marcus addressed the massive crowd from a stage that had been erected in the village center. Today, that same little girl is excelling in school, teaching traditional wisdom to urban students and inspiring educational programs that are helping hundreds of other children throughout Africa. Amara took the microphone with the confidence of someone who had grown comfortable speaking to large audiences, despite being only 10 years old. Her combination of traditional dignity and modern education made her uniquely capable of addressing diverse groups in ways that resonated across cultural boundaries. My grandfather taught me that when you save someone's life, you become responsible for protecting their spirit, she said in English that was nearly perfect despite her young age. The Thunder Road family saved my life, and now they protect the spirits of many children through education and medical care. She paused, looking out at the sea of leather-clad bikers who had become her extended family, her voice carrying the wisdom that came from someone who had faced death and lived to help others. But I think maybe I saved their spirits too. Before they met me, they were people who rode motorcycles together. Now they are guardians and protectors and teachers. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, but Marcus's attention was focused on Mandla Okafor, who was standing beside his granddaughter with obvious pride and emotion. "She speaks truth beyond her years," the traditional healer observed. His English improved through 2 years of regular interaction with Thunder Road members. "The ancestors chose well when they sent you to protect her." Dr. A. Mndlelos approached Marcus during the celebration, carrying news that would define the next phase of their mission. "Marcus, I've been contacted by the World Health Organization and the African Union. They want to study our community integration model for implementation in other regions facing similar challenges with rural healthcare and emergency response." "What kind of study?" Marcus asked. "Documentation of our rescue protocols, analysis of our cultural cooperation methods, and training programs that could help other volunteer organizations develop similar capabilities," Dr. Mndlelos explained. "They're particularly interested in how we've maintained long-term commitments to individual families while expanding our community service activities." The recognition from international organizations represented validation of what the Thunder Road MC had accomplished, but it also represented an opportunity to help thousands of other families facing emergencies in remote areas throughout Africa. "What does Amara think about her story being used as an example for international programs?" Marcus asked. Dr. Mndlelos smiled. "She says that if other children can be helped, then she's honored to share her story with the world. She also says she wants to study international development so she can help design programs that respect traditional culture while providing modern opportunities." 3 years after the Mamba rescue, Amara's story had been featured in documentaries, academic studies, and international development programs focused on community-based emergency response and cultural preservation. But for the Thunder Road MC, the real measure of their success wasn't international recognition. It was the confidence and joy they saw in an 11-year-old girl who was excelling in advanced academic programs while maintaining her connection to traditional Zulu culture. She's been accepted into the Accelerated Science Program at the University of Cape Town, Dr. Mndlelos announced during one of their monthly meetings. Full scholarship starting at age 13. She'll be the youngest student in the university's history, Marcus felt the kind of pride that came from watching someone you love achieve their dreams through hard work and natural ability. What does she want to study? Medicine, obviously, Dr. Mundlalos replied with a smile. But also traditional healing practices, international development, and something she calls cultural bridge engineering, which I think means finding ways to help traditional communities benefit from modern knowledge without losing their cultural identity. Amara had been invited to address the African Union about her educational experiences and her vision for combining traditional wisdom with modern knowledge. The 12-year-old, who had once been terrified by deadly serpents, was now confidently speaking to continental leaders about sustainable development and cultural preservation. "I want to be a doctor like Aunt Sarah," Amara explained to the distinguished audience of African presidents and development ministers. "But I also want to be a traditional healer like my grandfather. I think the two kinds of knowledge can work together to help people better than either one alone." Professor Elizabeth Watson, a specialist in rural healthcare delivery who had been studying the Thunder Road model, was amazed by Amara's mature understanding of complex developmental concepts. This child represents the future of integrated development in Africa, someone who can bridge traditional wisdom and modern knowledge without losing either. Mandla Okafor, now 80 years old but still sharp and dignified, nodded approvingly as he watched his granddaughter address continental leaders. "She carries the wisdom of both worlds. This is what the ancestors intended when they sent the Thunder Road family to protect her." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. 4 years after the Mamba rescue, the Thunder Road Wildlife Emergency Response Program had been adopted by volunteer organizations in 15 African countries. Their protocols had resulted in successful rescues during wildlife emergencies, natural disasters, and medical crises throughout sub-Saharan Africa. But their most significant achievement was the transformation of isolated rural communities into connected networks of mutual support. The Thunder Road Education Foundation had grown to support over 500 children throughout southern Africa, providing scholarships that allowed rural students to access advanced education while maintaining connections to their traditional cultures. Amara had become the program's most effective advocate, speaking at fundraising events and helping design curricula that integrated traditional knowledge with modern academic subjects. "We've created something unprecedented," observed Dr. James Muthembu, a social anthropologist studying the Thunder Road phenomenon, a volunteer organization that transcends racial, cultural, and national boundaries while respecting traditional values and maintaining long-term commitments to individual families. Amara, now 13 years old and preparing for early admission to university, had become a bridge between worlds that had rarely communicated effectively before her rescue. Her unique position as both a traditional Zulu child and an international symbol of cross-cultural cooperation allowed her to facilitate understanding in ways that adult diplomats often couldn't achieve. The 5th annual Mthunzini Miracle Rally brought together over 4,000 motorcycles from 28 countries, representing the largest gathering of volunteer emergency responders in African history. The event had evolved far beyond its motorcycle origins to become a celebration of international cooperation, cultural exchange, and community service. Representatives from the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the African Union, and various international development organizations attended to study the Thunder Road model for potential implementation in other regions facing similar challenges with rural emergency response and cultural preservation. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable," commented Dr. Patricia Santos, a WHO representative studying community-based emergency response systems. You've demonstrated that volunteer organizations can provide sustainable, culturally appropriate services that enhance rather than replace traditional community structures. Amara addressed the international audience with the poise of someone who had grown comfortable with global attention while remaining grounded in her local community and traditional values. 5 years ago, I was a scared little girl who needed help, she began, her voice carrying the wisdom that came from someone who had faced death and chosen to use that experience to help others. Today, I am a student, a teacher, a bridge between cultures, and living proof that miracles happen when good people decide to protect children they don't even know. She looked directly at Marcus and the Thunder Road leadership, her eyes bright with the affection and respect that had grown through 5 years of shared experiences and mutual commitment. But the real miracle isn't that I survived the Black Mambas. The real miracle is that 1,200 strangers became my family, and their love created opportunities for hundreds of other children throughout Africa. The emotional impact of Amara's speech was evident throughout the international audience, but Marcus was most moved by Mandla Okafor's reaction. The traditional healer, now 81 years old but still dignified and wise, had tears streaming down his weathered face. "She has become everything the ancestors dreamed," he whispered to Marcus in a voice thick with emotion. "A bridge between worlds, a protector of wisdom, a teacher of hope." 5 years after a terrified 8-year-old girl had stood frozen before deadly serpents and whispered a prayer for divine intervention, that same child was addressing the African Union about sustainable development, cultural preservation, and international cooperation. Dr. Amara Okafor, she had earned an honorary doctorate in community development from the University of Cape Town, was at 16 the youngest person ever invited to address the continental body. "Education saved my life twice," she told the distinguished audience of African leaders. "First, when my grandfather's teachings kept me still in front of the Mambas. Second, when the Thunder Road family gave me opportunities to learn about the wider world while remaining connected to my heritage." She paused, looking directly at the delegates from 54 African nations, her voice carrying the authority that came from someone who had lived the principles she was advocating. "The lesson of my story is simple. When people from different backgrounds unite to protect children, those children can grow up to help protect entire communities. Traditional wisdom and modern knowledge are both needed to solve Africa's challenges. Neither one alone is sufficient, but together they can create solutions that no one imagined possible." As the African Union session concluded and delegates began discussing implementation of community-based emergency response programs throughout the continent, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a child's prayer and 1,200 motorcycles thundering across the South African bushveld. They had started as a motorcycle club looking for adventure and brotherhood. A little girl's crisis had transformed them into protectors, teachers, and bridges between cultures that had rarely found common ground before her rescue. 8 years after Amara Okafor had stood frozen before Black Mambas and whispered a prayer, the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club had become the largest volunteer emergency response network in Africa. Their programs provided healthcare, education, and emergency services to over 3 million people across 20 countries. But their greatest achievement was the living proof that love and courage could transform individual tragedies into continental movements for positive change. For Marcus and his brothers, the statistics and international recognition mattered less than the smile on Amara's face when she successfully defended her master's thesis at age 18, or the pride in Mandla's eyes when his granddaughter was accepted into Harvard Medical School with full funding from the scholarship program that had grown from her own rescue. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, "What secret do you keep?" She's going to change the world, Dr. Mndlelose predicted during one of their regular family dinners in Mthunzini. Medical degree from Harvard, traditional healer training from her grandfather, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from someone who has survived death and chosen to dedicate their life to helping others. Amara laughed with the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by unconditional love and support from both traditional and modern sources. First, I have to finish medical school. Then I want to establish teaching hospitals throughout Africa that combine modern medicine with traditional healing. I want to create places where children like I was can receive the best of both worlds. Marcus nodded approvingly, understanding that Amara's vision represented the natural evolution of everything they had accomplished together. Sounds like a project that might need some motorcycle riding volunteers for security and logistics. I was counting on it, Amara replied with the assurance of someone who had never doubted that her Thunder Road family would support any mission dedicated to protecting and helping others. You're not getting rid of me that easily. As the sun set over the village where their extraordinary journey had begun, 18-year-old Dr. Amara Okafor sat with her grandfather and her Thunder Road family, planning the next phase of their shared mission to transform emergency response, cultural preservation, and international cooperation throughout Africa. The terrified child who had once faced deadly serpents through traditional wisdom and courage had become a healer, teacher, and leader whose influence extended across continents. But she was still the same girl who called Marcus uncle, who could perform traditional ceremonies with her grandfather, and who never forgot to thank the ancestors for sending 1,200 angels when a little girl whispered a prayer in the African bush. 10 years after a child's prayer had summoned an army of bikers to her rescue, that same prayer had become a movement that protected millions of children across Africa and beyond. The Black Mambas had been defeated not by violence or technology, but by love, courage, and the willingness of strangers to risk everything for one small life. And in the end, that one small life had changed not just her own world, but the entire continent's understanding of what was possible when different cultures united to protect the innocent and nurture the potential that exists in every child who has ever faced darkness and chosen to believe in the possibility of angels.